I was when Mike Davies asked me to come and speak today. I made it clear to him that I didn't have a canned presentation, so I don't have slides, I don't have videos. I've just got me, and I've got my story. So I look forward to sharing that with you today. I was going to also start by asking everybody to introduce themselves and tell me a little bit about themselves, but there's far too many people for that. So that's off my list anyway. So start by telling you a little bit about myself, because some of you may have, I may have met you before, you may have heard something about my story. I came to faith in Christ in 2004. I'm 62, so that made me in my mid-40s. And I come from an unchurched background, born and raised in Montreal, a kid from the other side of the tracks, a high school dropout, didn't do very well in school, and I figured, I grew up, I figured when I went out into the world that money was what it was all about. If I became successful financially, my life would be perfect. Had a lot of brokenness in my childhood. My mother struggled with some severe mental illness. My father with alcoholism. I left home, dropped out of school in grade 11, left home at the age of 17. I left Montreal, moved to Ottawa, and then I bounced around Canada, Alberta, and back and forth, always chasing the almighty dollar, trying to become successful financially. Along the way, I met a beautiful registered nurse from Manitoba. Her name is Lise, and we began a life together. And I started different kinds of businesses. Of course, this is before me coming to faith in Christ, so I had no spiritual dimension to my life. Money was my God in the truest sense. And so I think coming from where I came from, as I used to say I came from nowhere, from nothing. I don't believe that today. I believe I was God's child, and that God always had his hand on my life. But my perspective was that I came from nowhere and that I came from nothing. And I guess in some ways I thought I was nothing. So I viewed my struggle to become successful, I think as a Rocky Balboa kind of struggle. This idea that a bum from the other side of the tracks could go into the ring and maybe win. And I think that I drew a lot of life from the struggle. And I don't know that I really believed that I could become successful financially. But what I did believe was that if I went down, I was going to go down swinging. And that in my obituary, they'd say, well, Dave gave it a good old college try. Because there was no evidence in my childhood, no evidence in my family life that would say that I should succeed financially. But I drew a lot of life from the experience of trying to become successful. And along the journey, I went from business to business. I started off as a salesman, a commission salesman. I quickly went into various types of sales businesses. I parlayed those small sales businesses into bigger businesses. And I was always really good I was really motivated, really hardworking, really good at organizing and motivating other people. And running these various types of sales businesses. And at 28, I went bankrupt, though, because I was good at leveraging human resources. I knew how to sell, I knew how to organize people, I knew how to motivate people. I knew how to generate top line, but I knew nothing about how to manage the bottom line. I hadn't gone to business school. I didn't come from an entrepreneurial family, so I had no mentoring when it came to accounting, about how to manage money, how to plan for the future. So the money literally was going through my fingers like sand. And so at the age of 28, I declared personal bankruptcy. And at that time, I was with my wife, Lise, who's with me today, thankfully. And we weren't married at that time, but we were living together. And I went to her with, at that time, I came back from a meeting with a bankruptcy trustee, and I was very demoralized. And I knew I had to find a way forward, a way to grab a hold of my financial life. And I'd heard about a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. And it's a book that's about 100 years old now. And it's a series of fables written in Babylonian times. And basically it illustrates, or tells the communicates the principles, the proven principles that govern the creation and management of all wealth. So here I am, a 28-year-old, bankrupt, ambitious young man at the lowest point in his young life, wanting desperately to succeed, but knowing that I can generate top line, but I was having a really hard time holding on to the money and creating a really good, sustainable bottom line. I knew I needed a plan. I needed principles. So I took the principles. I went with that little book. I went to my wife, Lise, and I said, read this if you don't mind, and we'll talk about it. She read the book, and we both read the book, and I said, I'd like to apply these principles together. And she agreed, and so we embraced those principles, which fundamental things like saving a percentage of all you earn, and learning how to make your money multiply, controlling your expenses, all basic Finance 101 principles. And we applied those principles in our life successfully. And by the age of 44, we had done well. I started a business about 10 years earlier. And this particular business, I was one of the first people involved in the payday loan business in Canada. 1994. I started a payday loan company here in Vancouver. And it grew very quickly across Canada. I had about 10 outlets from coast to coast. And then I was one of the first operators in the online payday loan business in the United States, which I got into about 4 years later. And if you remember correctly, the mid to late 1990s was when the internet was becoming popular. And online, everything was going from brick and mortar to clicks and to internet. So everybody was trying to convert brick and mortar businesses over to online businesses. So I moved my payday loan business, not moved, but I kept my Canadian retail business as it was, and I transitioned it over to an online business. And it took off. And we went from having one employee in 1994 to 500 employees, and going from $20,000 a week in loan volume to doing millions and millions of dollars a month in loan volume all across North America. So here I was at the age of 44 with a company with 500 employees. I was making literally millions of dollars a year just flowing into my bank account. And but I was as confused and as empty as I'd ever been. I had everything I'd ever wanted. So here's this kid from the other side of the tracks, nobody from nowhere, who wanted to be a millionaire by the age of 30. That was a flag that I waved. I was making, in some months, over $1 million, just in a month. And here I was with a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, a nice home in Langley, and I could go anywhere, stay in any hotel I wanted, fly privately if I wanted to. Yet I felt dead empty inside. My wife wasn't happy with me, with our relationship. I was traveling all the time. I was busy, working hard all the time. And in my mind, I figured working hard was what it was all about. I figured the harder I worked and the better provider that I was, the better man I was. And that was my simple math. But I was dead empty inside. And it was around this time that we had a lady work for us. Her name is Bonnie. And a sweet Christian lady. She was a housekeeper for us. And Bonnie had been working for us actually for a couple of years. And we found out later that she was praying for us as she would clean our house. She'd come in twice a week. And my wife, who was born and raised as a Catholic, but was not a practicing Catholic, would sometimes pray with her. So when my wife was upset or worried about the kids or concerned about something, Bonnie and her would have time together and they'd talk. But I wasn't around, and I was very antagonistic about Christianity. I was very antagonistic about Christians in general. I figured that it was very culty and that Christians thought they were better than everybody else. And I had a whole long list of reasons I didn't like Christians. But at the core of it, I was just really angry at God. I felt abandoned by God. I felt my family was abandoned by God. But anyway, Bonnie was working for us at this time. So there was this crucial time in my personal journey where I hit the pinnacle of my business success. I was earning more money than I could ever imagine earning. I didn't have to work again. I could sell the business the next day and not work again the rest of my life. And but I was empty, and my marriage wasn't going well. And Bonnie was in our home praying for us. I didn't know it at the time. I also have epilepsy. That's another bit of an interesting part of the dimension of my story, is that I have grand mal seizures from time to time. I'm doing really well right now. I haven't had one for a few years. But a grand mal seizure, for anybody who doesn't know, is pretty dramatic. And after you have one, you're out of it for a period of time. Like you're laid out for a couple of days, really laid out for about a day. Anyway, I was out for lunch. I had a seizure in the back seat of the car. I had a driver driving me. I was in the back seat of the car, had a grand mal seizure, and the driver called home, told my wife I had a seizure. She said, bring him home. I pull up in front of the house. After you have a seizure, after the actual seizure itself, you go into what is referred to as a postictal state. A postictal state is a state where the best way to describe it, and a non-medical way of describing it, is that the lights are on, but nobody is home. So your eyes are open, and you might be standing up and walking around, but you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are, and that postictal state can go on for 5 minutes, it can go on for 10 minutes, it can go on for longer. Anyway, by the time the driver gets me home to my front door, I've had my seizure, and I'm still in this postictal state. So, of course, I don't remember any of this. I'm just told this by other people. So, pull up to the front door, and Bonnie was there to receive me. So I guess the driver helped me out of the back seat of the car, and I'm in this condition where she's seeing me for the first time, and I'm standing up in my normal way. I'm looking at her, but I'm not there. And so he helps me into the house and helps me upstairs and puts me to bed, and I assume. But she was, my wife said, visibly moved and upset by the sight of me in this condition. So a few days later, I'm in the laundry room. My wife comes up to me after I've recovered from my seizure, and she says, I was talking to Bonnie earlier this morning, and she was very upset by, seeing you after your seizure, and she was crying. And I said, I felt badly about that. She said, but Bonnie's come to me and she's asked me, she said that she was praying and that she felt God tell her that she should come and pray with me. And I said, oh, okay. So I said, so God is speaking to Bonnie? So the idea that God would speak. So she said, Bonnie, God told her. And I went, so the language of God speaking is not a language, not a terminology that was in my vocabulary. I didn't hear people say those kinds of things. But Bonnie was a very sweet lady, very gentle, very kind, and I would say that she was the kind of person that not only, she didn't even talk the talk, she walked the walk. She was very gentle-spirited, very, very loving. She never was preaching in any way, shape, or form. We knew she was a Christian, but she was just personified love and care for my family. And she was a very sweet lady. So I could not, in good conscience, say no to Bonnie coming to pray for me. So I said, well, it's not going to do any good, but if it makes Bonnie feel better, invite her over. She can come over and she can pray for me. So we sat in the living room, that we still have today in Langley. And she came over, and Lisa and I sat there with Bonnie, and we just chatted for a few minutes about life and whatever. And then the subject migrated to her church and whatever. And then she asked if she could pray, and then she prayed. And when she prayed, it was very, very touching for me as a non-believer. I was still very hard-hearted, very unbelieving, but I was very touched by her love and her concern for me, and the prayers. I felt very, very loved by them, and I cried. I must admit. And of course, when I got weepy in those moments when she was praying for me, I chalked it up to the fact that I just had a seizure. And after you have a seizure, you're very weakened emotionally and mentally, like you're in a very weakened state. So I just chalked that up to this fact that I was in this weakened state physically. But anyway, we talked about her church, and she attended CLA, Christian Life Assembly, in Langley. This is in 2004. And I heard later that apparently there was a major move of God going on, and a major move of the Spirit in that church at that time. But anyway, so I talked to her about church, and I said, well, I don't believe in God. I'm an agnostic. I was a self-described agnostic because I didn't want to be rude and say, there is no God. I said, it's safer to say there might be a God. So I said, but my wife and I both believe that Christian principles were good, and that it might be a good idea for the kids to go to church, to Sunday school sometimes, because we believe in family. We always were very family-oriented. So I said, well, maybe I'll go and check out your church, because my wife leaves and the kids were going out of town to Winnipeg to visit her family for a couple of weeks. I was going to be all by myself. So I said to Bonnie, it was almost kind of like I was trying to curry favor with her, because she was being so nice to me. I felt like I want to almost throw her a bone, Maybe I'll come to your church. Maybe that, in my twisted thinking, I was thinking I would make her feel better if I went to her church or something. I have no idea why I said it, but I said it. I think God was clearly moving. But anyway, so the next day, my Lise and the kids go to Manitoba to visit family. I'm by myself. That weekend, that Sunday coming, a friend, a neighbor who was also a Christian, drove me to CLA, Christian Life Assembly, to go to church. And I walked in, and Franco was telling the story. Franco, probably against the wall there in the blue shirt, was sharing the story that he was standing behind me. I didn't know Franco then, but so here I am, big 6'2", lug of a guy, walks into church, and I've never been in a big Pentecostal church before. My vision of a church was the Salvation Army Church in Montreal was very typical, cathedral, dark carpet, dark lights, and hymns and that kind of stuff. I went to a little bit of that when I was a kid, so I didn't really have much. I'd never seen a church with a worship band. Like the idea that there was this worship band that was like a rock and roll band. I was just like, whoa. So I come in this big bright sanctuary, and all these people that are smiling and laughing, saying hello to each other, getting ready for church, and there's this buzz in the air, and then the pastor comes up and says a few words, and then the worship team gets up and starts playing. And as soon as the music started, as soon as the worship music began, I began to become overwhelmed with emotion. And I had no idea why I was feeling emotional. But tears started running down my face, and my nose started running, and I was doing everything I could to not cry. But I was crying. I fought with everything I had. Of course, I'm a man, and I don't like to cry in public. It's very unmanly. But as much as I tried not to cry, I cried. And then finally the worship music stopped. I regained my composure. The pastor gets up, starts his sermon, and I start crying again. I cried all the way through the sermon, from the beginning of the sermon to the end of the sermon. And what's most maddening about it, of course, is that I have no idea why I'm crying, because there's nothing he's saying, and there's no message in any of it that I'm going, oh, gee, that's new to me. I think this, or I think that, or that's truth. None of that's happening. This is just all based on this feeling that's going on in the church, and it's absolutely mystifying. So I feel like maybe I'm losing my mind. That's really, frankly, what I'm thinking. Okay, I've had a couple of seizures recently. I'm in a low point. I'm not strong, so I go home. After this, finally I get out of there, blowing my nose and doing everything I can to keep my act together. I get a ride home, and I say, okay, after I regain my composure, I'm going to go back next Sunday. I got to calm down. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to maintain my composure. I'm going to go back into the church. I'm going to evaluate this thing for what it is, because clearly I didn't, something came apart here, and I got to figure out, if this is a reasonable. I don't even know why I was going back. It was almost like a pride thing, like I had to leave this church. So I said, okay, I'm going to go back to church. So I go back the next Sunday, and I go to the same seat again in front of Franco again. Apparently, I learned later, and I say, okay. And I'm all ready to, all clear-minded and ready to evaluate this thing logically and intelligently. Because keep in mind, I'm a guy who's been in business, so I'm a guy who would have told you that I made all my decisions based on data. Okay, this is me. This is how I would tell you that I made all my decisions prior to this day. Okay, that I would look at a subject matter, then I'd read about it as much as I could, then I'd look for expertise in the area, I'd go and I'd speak to the experts, I'd get all the best advice I could get, and then I'd make a decision based on the data. That's what I would tell you. Okay, and here I am in this church, and I'm saying, okay, I can't make any kind of decision if I'm crying all the time, and I'm emotionally overwhelmed. So here I go back to church, I stand, the pastor gets up, he gives the announcements and church business or whatever, everything's fine. The worship team gets up, starts playing music, and I completely come undone. Again, I'm crying, tears running up, and I mean, it's even worse than the first time. Like I'm blowing my nose. It's so embarrassing. I mean, it doesn't get any more embarrassing than this. I wanted to flee the building. But I wasn't driving because of my seizures. I didn't have wheels. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. I've got to drive there from my neighbor. So anyway, I cry all the way through the worship music. Worship music stops. I blow my nose, get my act together. Pastor comes up, starts giving a sermon, and again I start crying. Again. So from the beginning of the sermon to the end of the sermon, and again, what's most mystifying to me today is that I still have no idea why I'm crying. I don't have no aha moment. Okay, there's nothing like that. Jesus said this, like nothing. Okay, but it's just this feeling. It's just overwhelming me. Long story short, I went home and I did the same thing again. I said, okay, I gotta give this one more try. This is how tough of a nut I was. I'm not surrendering to anybody. I gotta figure this thing out. So I gotta come back the next Sunday. I come back. This is the third time I'm back now, and I'm swearing blind. I'm walking in going, I am not crying. This is what's coming. I'm going in with a promise. This is not happening. I got to keep my act together here. I don't know what's going. And of course, all the way through, I'm doubting my sanity. So I go in, and the exact same thing starts again. The worship music, I start crying. The pastor starts preaching, I start crying. And by the end of that third service, I am so undone. I really don't know what to do because now I'm really at the end of my rope. And I think I couldn't say it, but I was just it's almost like, okay. So finally, Bonnie comes up to me at the end of the service, the third service, and she says, would you like to pray? And I go, at that point, I would have done anything. I said, yeah, sure. So I go into the prayer sanctuary I go into the prayer room behind the main sanctuary, and there's Bonnie and the gentleman who drove me to church, Andrew, and the pastor, Pastor Don Cantillon, Brent Cantillon's father, Don Cantillon, who's passed away. But Brent was away, Don was preaching that weekend. And Don, who I'd never met before, in the privacy of that prayer sanctuary, explained what the sinners explained the idea of what happens when you surrender your life to Christ. He said that, that when I gave my life to Christ, when I surrendered my life and give it to Him, that I'd be born again and washed clean and new, like a brand new baby. And when he said those words, I saw myself being washed clean of all the sin. At the age of 44, I'm born and raised in Montreal. I was talking to Patrice, who's here somewhere. He's from Montreal, so he knows what I mean. When you say you come from Montreal and you come from the wrong side of the tracks of Montreal, that means something a little bit different than it means in other cities. So I was a friend of sin. I had a lifetime of sin. I was a kid from the other side of the tracks. I did a lot of bad things. I took a lot of chances. I broke, a lot of rules along the way. And I carried the burden of that sin. And when he said, you'll be washed clean like a brand new baby, my mind exploded with a sense of purity and perfection and love that I've never, ever sensed and felt before. And my mind was literally blown, exploded with this reality of God's presence and God's love, unconditional and complete and total love and acceptance for me, which I've never felt before. And it was so overwhelming that I could barely breathe, I could barely gasp out the words. So he said, just follow me in this prayer, and he would say the words, and I would follow him. But in my attempt to follow him, I could barely even breathe. I was gasping the words of the prayer out to him to the end, and the tears were just flowing. And by the end of it, I was completely spent. But I felt for the very first time the presence of God through His Holy Spirit. It was truly overwhelming. I mean, like a heavy, heavy, warm blanket of love and pure perfection surrounding me. It was just, I can't even describe it, but it was God's presence. So here I was, a 44-year-old man, a father, a husband, an entrepreneur with 500 employees, making millions of dollars a year, and now I'm a born-again Christian. So, my wife is out of town. She's essentially a secular Catholic. She comes back from her trip with the kids. I'm sitting in meet them at the door, and she says, how are you doing? And I go, I built, this business and this wealth with being a follower of Christ. To make a long story very short, I ended up selling the business that I owned to the management team that worked for me, my two brothers and another employee. I structured a deal where they could buy the business from me, no money down, and they paid me out of the profits of the business over the next 5 years. I was a sole owner and shareholder of the company. So I'd already made enough money that I didn't need to get any of the proceeds from the sale of the business. So if I didn't get $1 from the sale of the business, I was still set for life. But my brothers ran the business for 10 years, and over 5 years they paid me out the money that we, which is kind of a funny noise here. Is there a buzz in that speaker? Okay. Anyway, they paid me out, but that's the business side of that story. But here I was. Within a year, I sold the business. And you can imagine the challenge you face at the age of 44, having lived a secular life. So you have a worldview. So now you see the world in a very definite way. You make all of your decisions based on a set of assumptions. I'm a leader of a family. I have children. I have a wife. And I now say that I don't believe in an unseen God, and then a week later, I do now believe in this unseen God, and this unseen God is summarized in this thing called the Bible, which is a book, which now all of a sudden I believe to be true. So I don't know enough about the Bible to say that the Bible is true, but I do know enough about that experience that I have that I couldn't resist. So I tried to read the Old Testament, it made no sense. It was very old and very, archaic. So I said, well, my pastor advised me stay in the New Testament, and I love the New Testament. I love Matthew, because Matthew was a tax collector. and I was a loan shark, so tax collector, loan shark, not too far away from each other. So Matthew and I got along really well. So we hung out, and I really loved Jesus, and I really loved, the Sermon on the Mount, and I drew close to Jesus and all the words that he said. And I said, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, there's no way we're going to get to where we got to get to in terms of understanding who Jesus is and who God is, just by going to church on Sunday and taking an Alpha program. So through another set of divine events, we ended up signing up for a YWAM, Youth with a Mission, Discipleship Training School in Kona, Hawaii. And we had a DTS in Kona. We had 3 months lecture phase and a 2-month outreach. So you got a picture. Here I am, a guy with 500 employees making millions of dollars. I sell this business. Now, next thing you know, I'm on a campus in Kona with a bunch of broke missionaries. And everybody's talking about, I got to raise money for my school fees. I don't know if I'm going to be able to go on outreach or not. I still got to raise $100. I still got to raise $500. And I'm walking around going like, these people are living on faith. These people are raising money from friends and family, or saving up their own money to come here to do this. And I'm walking around with this guy who had this business and still is just sold this business worth millions of dollars, and I'm undercover. Like, I showed up, I said to Lise, we can't tell anybody who we are. Like, I mean, if someone says, well, what do you do? I said, well, we're a business guy, whatever. No color tonight, no color commentary on who we were or what we were. But if anybody's been exposed to YWAM, if anybody did, show of hands for anybody who's done a DTS in this room. Okay, so people who raise their hands understand what I'm talking about. So I'm sitting in this environment of broke missionaries who are believing God for the support they need to continue their good work. And it's a culture that I've never been exposed to. I never knew even existed. But they're lovely people. They're lovely, Jesus-loving people who've just laid down their lives completely, and they're just pursuing the things of the Lord. And I'm watching my teachers teach, and these are also volunteer missionaries who have given their lives over to the Lord. And these are brilliant people. Like, I mean, the teachers who've been in the mission for 30, 40 years, in the lectures, you're looking at these people, you kind of go, their brains are like this big. They're huge. And these are people that could be in business, could be in any type of career, and could have made as much money as they ever wanted to make, but they chose to be broke missionaries like all the other missionaries, raising their support. So I'm just flabbergasted by all of this, because I didn't even know this existed. I didn't know that people were like this. I didn't know that there was such a thing as this type of a world. So I go into this YWAM lecture, or this BTS experience with my wife, very low-key, just soaking up all the teaching, but not being honest about who we were, and even a glimpse of the nature of our lives, because I didn't know how to reconcile the wealth. I didn't know how to reconcile the success with who we were, or who we become as followers of Christ. And that's what we were there, hopefully, to try and find out and to figure out. And that was until one day in lecture, Lorne Cunningham, the founder of the mission, had invited somebody to speak. And this gentleman, Dave, was his name, from Middle America somewhere, from Ohio or something. He was a successful entrepreneur in the sports, in the recreation center business. And this tanned, good-looking guy gets up to the front, and Lorne Cunningham introduces him as a guest who's come from Ohio to visit YWAM Kona, and he's a big supporter of YWAM. And he just wanted to give this gentleman, whose name happened to also be Dave, an opportunity to share with the class. And there was like 250 of us in the class. And this entrepreneur gets up and starts telling us, or Lorne had told us a little bit about his business, how he built these big, beautiful fitness centers, and they're a blessing to the community, and he's a Christian guy, and he's a great guy. And so he invites David to start sharing whatever he wants to share with the class. So this David guy gets up and starts to speak and tell about his business, about his story as an entrepreneur. And he, as a Christian entrepreneur, and he starts to come undone in front of the whole class. He starts to weep. And I'm watching this guy, and I'm starting to come undone because I'm watching it. Because here I am, I'm walking around not telling anybody who we are, not telling anybody that we're entrepreneurs and that we're successful financially or anything else. But here's this guy, a successful entrepreneur, who's at these big fitness centers and whatever, and he's at the front, and he's going on, and he starts saying things like, well, people in the church don't appreciate us entrepreneurs, and, we're not understood, and, a lot of people look at us like we're just a paycheck, like we're just like an ATM machine or whatever, and he starts to weep. He starts to come undone. And I'm sitting there watching this happen, and tears are coming down my eyes because I'm feeling this guy completely, because I understand how he's feeling, and I understand the burden that he carries as a financially successful entrepreneur. You carry, as a Christian entrepreneur particularly, you carry a sense of duty, a sense of responsibility. You have a responsibility of stewardship. Anyway, so here I am, and I had, at that point, not shared any of our business reality or life reality with our classmates. So I get up out of my seat, tears streaming down my eyes, and I march up to the mic, and I said, Lorne, because in the class, people would do this if they had a word or something. People would get up and say something. I said, Lorne, can I say something? So I went, and I took the mic, and I was equally incoherent. I didn't have a deep message of any kind, except for I really understand how this guy feels. I basically confessed to my class that back home I'm an entrepreneur, and a lot of people in my community will know who I am because I've been successful as an entrepreneur, and I've also felt judged, or I've also felt whatever I felt, and I just devolved into tears, and I just said, YWAM's the best. I marched back to my seat in tears. But what it was not that I was able to say anything that was revelatory to me or anybody else, but I think what it was a coming out. So I came out to my fellow students admitting for the first time who I was. Nobody knew the scope and the scale of what that meant. I was just a business guy who did well. But anyway, so that was a wonderful turning point, for me. And we left that DTS. I'm going on. I'm going to spend a lot of my time just telling my testimony here. But
are you able to wrap it up in 1 minute? I know it's
1 minute. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'm just lost in the story too.
Well, they keep laughing. They keep drawing me in. Anyway, long story short, I left YWAM with a deep sense of purpose to go on this journey to discover how to reconcile my faith with the reality of our entrepreneurial life and our journey. And so we left. YWAM came home, and since then, that was in 2005, my journey really has been as an entrepreneur, as an investor, walking it out. And anyway, I wanted to make this an interactive session. So you've got some color. You've got some color on me. So let me see here. What I did, just one little story I need 1 more minute to wrap it up. Before we came home, at the end of our DTS, 3-month lecture phase, 2-month outreach, we were really almost afraid to come home, back to our lives. And I went to my wife and I said, here we are, our hearts were filled with a desire to serve the Lord as fully and completely as we possibly could. So I said, we got to pray. So I took my asset spreadsheet that I had at that time, which is a summary of all the assets that we have, all of our different sources of income. And I said, we have to pray, we have to surrender these to the Lord. So we got down on our hands and our knees together, and I held this asset spreadsheet. We each held it. And we said a prayer. And the prayer that we said was, Lord, and I led the prayer. I said, this is everything I've ever worked for in my life. This represents all of our assets, everything we own in the world. If you want us to give this away to somebody and walk out this door without any money and to go and serve you anywhere in the world, we will. Speak to us, tell us what you want us to do, and this belongs to you. It's not ours. So we physically took our financial statement and together we prayed that prayer through tears. And we surrendered our financial lives to the Lord completely and totally. And fearfully, because the Lord did not say give it all away. But I went home, and every day, the prayer was every single day today, I walked with, Lord, how do you want me to use this wealth? How do you want me to use my time and my talents? How can I invest them for the sake of the kingdom? Which is the only reason I'm here today, is to share a little bit that I can, that'll help you, or that will hopefully help somebody else. So, questions. Does anybody have any questions for me? I have some feelings and some thoughts that I think